Hi, guys. Tonight I wanted to go over some of the prophecies. We've talked about them a little bit over the years. Um, they're in detail in my book, Ancient Prophecies Revealed. But since it looks like a piece of one from Obadiah is actually being fulfilled with this Gaza war, I wanted to bring your attention to it again and make sure we understand it real well and know what we're looking for. Last Thursday we had our normal Q&A, and in our normal Q&A we talked about it a little bit, and I wanted to go into just a little bit more detail. And so let me find my information here. And let's just go to Obadiah. And actually, before we do that, what's going on, if you haven't been paying attention, is that as normal, Gaza has been firing rockets at Israel. This happens every so often. Israel refrains, destroys some of the places that the rockets come from. And it's basically political power. So what's going on is Hamas is a radical Islamic terror group. It's also the official government of the Gaza Strip. And if it attacks Israel, Israel tries to show restraint, number one, because of the extreme political pressure of the rest of the world. And that's somewhat doable if Gaza, or anybody from that matter, Hezbollah or whoever, is firing rockets without guidance systems, because most of the rockets will just hit the dirt and that'll be it. But once anyone, Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Iran, anybody, has actual missiles that have guidance systems of some sort to hit their targets even half the time, it then becomes an unacceptable risk and has to be dealt with. And we know that, and it's been coming this way. And at this point, they have a lot of the same kind of missiles, but they also have a few of the newer missiles with guidance systems. So this has to be taken care of. And at this point, you have the powers, the main powers, which is Russia, China, and the United States, usually step in and say, you have to do this, or you can't do that, or send in peace troops, or whatever. At this particular point, China is not interested. They're dealing with their own things. Russia is possibly involved in a Ukraine situation. We'll just call it that at the moment. So they're not interested in doing anything at the moment. And over here in the United States, the Biden administration, they might be relooking at it now, but the last time I heard had said something like, let the powers over there deal with it. So that sounds to us like a cop-out. We're not coming to Israel's defense, for instance, but that's okay at this point. That creates a scenario where Russia, China, and the United States are saying, you deal with it. Do whatever happens, we're busy. So the political pressure then is off. The only other political pressure is from the Muslim nations around Israel, who really don't like Israel. And so what's going on then at this point, even the Muslim nations in that area are scared of Iran, what Iran might do. And Iran has proxies in Syria and working with Hamas in Lebanon, and not Hamas, excuse me, Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza. And everybody knows who they're working for. So at this point, with everyone being understandably terrified about Iran getting nuclear missiles and all this stuff, and these are kind of the proxies, at this point, like if I was Saudi Arabia or Syria or Iraq or anybody in that area, it's Iran is one thing, but if Iranian people with missiles are also in 5 or 6 other areas, that should make you very nervous. So at this point, if Israel takes care of the problem with Gaza, not much is going to be said, because it's going to be a step in neutralizing Iran, which is a threat to them also. So in other words, you've got China, United States, Russia, and most of the Muslim states that are okay with Israel doing what's necessary, at least for the moment, to a point. So in other words, that great political pressure is off. Now, anciently, the ancient law of Israel is, as far as wars go, there's two types of wars, and you see this in the law of Kings. There is a war of command, sometimes called a holy war, and it's when God has ordered you to do something. You don't ask the Senate, or the Sanhedrin, rather, for permission, you just do it. The other one is when it's not a war of command, something God has commanded. Like, for instance, if your neighbor gets into a fight and you want to go help them out, join the war on a certain side, then at that point, the king doesn't just do whatever he wants. He has to go to the Sanhedrin and get it approved. So there's those kind of wars and the others. Incidentally, it's interesting that a war that has to be approved by the Senate, women and children don't fight. It's just the army and the men. If it's a war of command, everybody takes action because it's usually an invasion or something. So wiping out the Canaanites is one command, and that's a whole different story. It's not genocide. It's removing the paganistic parts of the Canaanites, and there's a lot to that story. But the other one is if you are attacked. So if you're attacked, it's a war, a holy war, or a war of command. And the king is supposed to go forth and take care of the problem. What happens is you destroy the enemy and you take the land that the enemy attacked you from, annex it, and it becomes part of Israeli territory. And you can understand the point of this. The next time they attack, if they do, they always attack the borders, but the new border is going to be way over there. Our citizens are more protected. So that's just the standard way of doing things. Israel has a habit of giving things back. But they're doing it exactly the way the ancient law is. Because one of the laws is when you besiege a city to destroy it, you besiege it on three sides. You let the back be unbesieged. So if there's someone there that doesn't want to be there, being forced to be there, they can, when someone's not looking, sneak out the back. And anybody that flees out the back, they just let them go, because you can hunt down an individual terrorist or an individual enemy of the state or whatever later. But you want to protect all the civilians, and that's the situation. So that's always been the case with the ancient law. So now what's going on is the same kind of thing. I figured this was just one more of these kind of skirmishes, which isn't really amounting to anything biblically or prophetically, except for the fact that Netanyahu made the comment that anybody that attacks them, wherever that is, they're going to go in and eliminate the problem and then annex that territory, and it will become part of Israeli territory, period. Now, if he reneges on this, then this skirmish is just another skirmish. It's not part of a biblical prophecy. If he takes this area and keeps it, it could be the fulfillment of Obadiah, which we'll look at in a minute, unless 5 or 10 years from now, some other Israeli senator or somebody says, you know, we really ought to give that land back to them. That's what happened in 2005 with Ariel Sharon. If that happens, then this is just a dress rehearsal, because the entire thing will happen over again, because it's prophesied in Obadiah. But as we'll see in a minute, there's a couple of reasons why, even if we have 10 or 20 years, this looks like it really might be it for a couple of specific reasons. So let's first go to Obadiah, and we will look at this. So here is Obadiah. Now, when we look at this, the first thing is about Edom. And people look at this and say, okay, the ancient Edomite Empire was destroyed. It's all over. We're done. Except the ending of Obadiah does not fit. And so a lot of us have thought, well, this is a prophecy against Edom back then, and then end time prophecy. That would fit. However, Edom is talked about in a lot of rabbinical works as being Rome, specifically the Roman Empire, not Roman Catholicism, but the empire. And is possibly connected in thought, their thought anyway, as being part of the Babylonian mystery religion. I didn't give it a whole lot of thought because it very well could be true, but there's nothing really to support that until we had a copy of Gad the Seer. When you get to chapter 2 of Gad, he gives some details, which we'll talk about sometime, that connects the two. So now a lot of us are thinking this might be a dual fulfillment prophecy about ancient Edom and the Babylonian mystery religion. But we will skip over that for now because that's something that either has been totally fulfilled or two separate things. Incidentally, the thing is, most people look at all of these, and whether you understand them or not, they tend to say, well, it had something to do with back then. Either way, it's all over. The rabbis and the Dead Sea Scrolls both teach that the ancient prophets prophesied many things, but only the things that relates to the end times, which is the beginning of the start of the kingdom, that specific time period, are included in the canon. Okay, so Obadiah, the little pieces of Jeremiah, Joel, things like that, have something to do with first coming in the few places that we've seen, but also something with second coming. And sometimes you don't know that. For years I've said, really, even Nahum, because Nahum's not really, I can't see anything in Nahum that's not totally fulfilled and completely irrelevant to our time. But then I found the commentary on Nahum and the Dead Sea Scrolls, and they kind of explained themselves, and now I realize I was missing a lot. So another subject, but we'll get to those sometime. But anyway, so here's Edom, and that's verses 1 to verse, I think, 9. Let's see here. So we want to start with verse 15. Now, this only has 21 verses, so this might be short unless I just talk too much. So here's the point. The first part of this, we want to look at that. And verse 15 says, "For the day of the Lord is near upon all the heathen. As thou hast done, so it shall be done to thee. Thy reward shall return upon thine own head." So what's going on here is there's a certain time when the Lord begins to move and punish the Gentiles for how they treated Israel. Now, we know that happens during the tribulation period, and we know it's happened every so often with different things going on, and it's began to happen with Israel coming back. But I want you to notice this: the day of the Lord. The day of the Lord is a term for, and we won't get into the specifics of how to prove it because we've done that before, but specifically that 7-year period, that tribulation period. But in this case, notice what this says. It's not because we've just entered the tribulation period. That's not what it says. When the day of the Lord is near, okay? And near is kind of a relevant term. The birth pangs that Jesus talks about in Matthew 24 are referred to by the church fathers and a few other manuscripts as the time of the return of Israel. So in their mind, the birth pangs, when the time of the tribulation is beginning to draw near, starts in 1948 when Israel comes back. So it's been 73 years now. So that's not near in our mind. That's an entire lifetime. But it's much closer than 100 or 200 years or something like that. And when we look at the turn of the ages, it's consistent with the other two ages that we've seen. So the point is, this prophecy coming up is when Israel is between the time when Israel comes back, 1948, and the beginning of the tribulation. It's before the beginning of the tribulation, and that's the main point. And so they're going to be destroyed or whatever. "As you have drunk upon my holy mountain, so shall all the heathen drink continually. Yea, they shall drink, and they shall swallow down, and it shall be as though they had not been." So for centuries, the heathen have possessed the Temple Mount, done rituals on the Temple Mount that are not Jewish rituals. They have used it like it's theirs. They've done feasts, and by drink, I'm sure it's not talking about getting drunk. It's talking about some sort of a religious ritual, okay? But the point is, we've had the Alaska Mosque, the Dome of the Rock on the Temple Mount for centuries, and on his holy mountain, okay? And so it shall eventually be like it has not been. So that whole problem will be erased sometime, okay? And it'll be sometime apparently before the day of the Lord occurs. So, but look at this then. "On Mount Zion shall be deliverance." So someone will come to Mount Zion and deliver it. And this began, of course, in 1967 when they took the Temple Mount. "There shall be holiness, and the house of Jacob will possess their possessions." So a time is coming after 1948, before the beginning of the tribulation period, that Jacob comes back into the land. That happened in 1948, and takes the Temple Mount, the holy mountain, and possesses it. And that happened in 67 to a point, not completely yet, or they'd be moving the dome and building a temple and all that kind of stuff. So, but this is going to occur. Now, the house of Jacob shall be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame. The house of Esau shall be stubble. Now, this goes back to, again, if we were talking in the first part of this, verses 1 to 14, if you're talking about ancient Esau, then obviously they are stubble, they're gone. But the Edomites were in Edom when the Jews were kicked out of the land of Israel in 135 with the Bar Kokhba rebellion, started that 816-year time of expulsion. That left the land somewhat empty. And a lot of people, and I don't know if I can prove it anyway, but a lot of prophecy scholars say that the remnant of the house of Esau, the Edomites, came in, moved into the area. Today we call them Palestinians. Although Palestinians, the people that are claimed to be Palestinians, do seem to be from that area and also from maybe Lebanon and Syria and surrounding areas. So in time, everybody intermingles and it's just a group. But the basic part is there. And they still think that they own the land, much like Esau did. So it's kind of the same thing. They shall kindle them and devour them, and there shall not be any remaining of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken it. That will be interesting. Now, this happens sometime, but now we want to look specifically at verse 19 and 20, because these are the key verses. We want to go really slow and look at these. So let me look at my notes here for a minute just to make sure I'm not missing anything. Okay. So at this point, verse 19, I teach and have taught for many years that verse 19, or the first part of 19, was fulfilled in 1948. And so here's why. Let's look at this careful. So at this point then, verses 15, 16, 17, and 18 tell us that the Gentiles possess the land. They do rituals on the Temple Mount, but Jacob moves in, becomes a fire, and eventually fixes the problem. Well, Jacob, Israel, moved in 1948, the Temple Mount in 1967, and the problem kind of continues. So what happened in 1948? Well, they were supposed to create a nation, but at first it was supposed to be the entire area of ancient Israel. Then they decided to create a two-state solution divided at the Jordan River and have Israel on one side and what was called to be called Transjordan on the other, one Jewish, one Arab. Well, then there's a war, and of course they keep saying two-state solution. Now we have actually Jordan and West Bank and Gaza Strip and Israel, so it's a four-state solution at the moment. And they still want to divide Israel and make another two-state solution. So it's kind of an odd situation there, but that's what's going on at the moment. So verse 19, Israel becomes a nation, 1948. What happens? The people that are there were told by the surrounding Arab countries, pick up your stuff and flee. We will come in, we will wipe out the Jews, then you'll get to go home and continue life as normal. And that's basically what they were told. So people picked up and left. The Jews, however, won the war, which was prophesied in Scripture. And then what happens at this point then is that the people that left are displaced. They really don't have a home to come back to because it's another country now. And so that creates this refugee problem. Now, they could have been absorbed by other areas, and they kind of were to a point. And this is what happens in verse 19. So these people there, and where Israel, central Israel would be in central, what we call Israel today, they go to three places. So they of the south, in the southern part, actually take off and go to the Mount of Esau. Now, of course, that would be Jordan. Okay, and some people did pick up and go to Jordan, the ones especially along the border, the logical place, get out of the place and go to a safe place, Jordan. Okay. They, other people, go to the plain of the Philistines. Now, if you know anything about the Philistines, you remember Judges, I think it's chapter 14 and 15, or 13, 14, and 15. Remember the story of Samson. Samson was a native of either Gaza or Gath, I can't remember, but down there in the Philistine area. And the Lord used him to destroy the ancient Philistines. Incidentally, that's where the concept of Palestine gets its name, from the Philistines. Something the Romans did when they dispersed the Jews. So some of these people go to the area where the Philistines used to be and stay there. Well, that becomes Gaza Strip. Now, Gath, the ancient capital, is actually right outside of that in Israeli territory, the way it is right now anyway. But it's the ancient area. So Gath was the capital, I believe, or at least one of the large city-states. And then today, Gaza City is the capital of Gaza. But now let's go on. And then another group of people, it says, come and possess the fields of Ephraim. Now, if you get a map and you look at where Ephraim was in that area, you'll realize that this becomes the West Bank. So in the process of time, and I'm not saying it all started instantly in 1948, but in 1948, Israel moved in, and then these three things happened. People groups went to the Gaza Strip, or went one place and created the Gaza Strip, went to another place, created the West Bank, and went to another place, Jordan. And that happens. Now, later on, this part has not happened yet, to my knowledge. Benjamin shall possess Gilead. Now, the tribe of Benjamin, I don't know that they've been found. And there's been nothing that I know of them migrating to Israel. But Gilead is an ancient land close by the Golan Heights. Now, there's a series of prophecies about what happens between Israel and Syria involving the Golan Heights between the time of the second return of Israel, 1948, and the second return of the Messiah. And it's rather detailed. So that's one set of prophecies in the Bible. We're not talking extra biblical at this point. So at this point then, but somewhere along the line, the tribe of Benjamin comes and possesses Gilead. So they will have to buy or conquest take the northern west part of Jordan. So that's something that's not on the radar yet, but something that's happening. Apparently connected with this stuff. Notice if the creation of the Gaza Strip and the West Bank, which took time, and they didn't both happen at the same time either, the going to Jordan was pretty instant, but the others took time. This other part will take a longer time yet. So what's going on? So let's look at this. Verse 20 is the key that we want to look at connected with this current Gaza war. So again, Gaza's done these skirmishes, Israel and Gaza, a number of times, and it doesn't amount to anything. But somewhere along the line, may not this time either, but somewhere along the line, when you get missiles that hit their targets every time, and their targets are buses of kids and hospitals and who knows what, it can't be allowed. You can't even take the risk of missiles being there. So it has to be occupied by someone, period. And the ancient law is pretty specific. And this is what's going to happen. Now, verse 20 says, the captivity of the host of the children of Israel. So those are the Israelites that were captive, in other words, expulsed by the Romans, that came back in 1948. So modern Israel, okay, will possess the land of the Canaanites. Now look at this just for a second. Now the land of the Canaanites at different times went in more or less, but the Canaanites dwelt in Israel on the west coast, and it was mainly, they didn't go too far north, but it was, do I want to say about 2/3 of Israel. So in other words, from part of the northern part of Israel all the way down to the Sinai, that's all Canaanite territory. So for this to happen, Israel has to take and hold, annex, and keep the Gaza Strip. Now, I thought this happened way back when, But then in 2005, under Ariel Sharon, it was forsaken, which is another prophecy based in Zephaniah, that Gaza would be forsaken. Not conquested, but just given away. So first time that's ever happened. So anyway, again, no matter what happens now, if 5 years from now they give it back again, then this is not the prophecy. But we're going to see something interesting here. But they possess the land of the Canaanites. But it adds this, even as far as Zarephath. Now you remember Zarephath was the city where Elijah went and healed the widow's son. And long story there. But to make it short, the point is Zarephath is, the old ruins of Zarephath is right outside the city of Seraphon, Lebanon. So in other words, when they do this, I'm assuming it's the same time, but it might be two different, wars or something like that. But they wind up possessing all of the Canaanite land. So that would be Gaza Strip all the way up to Zarephath, which means they take and hold southern Lebanon. Now, there have already been 2 wars to go in and take southern Lebanon, and in both times they've given the area back. But again, when Hezbollah says we need to destroy Israel and we have even more advanced rockets now, if you keep letting them do that, eventually they will kill a lot of people. So that has to be stopped somewhere along the line. Now the political pressure is off. Now it's getting too dangerous with guided missiles. Good time for this to happen. So notice that Seraphon, Lebanon is between Tyre and Sidon. So the point I always make with this when you look at it is right now, let me see if I can see myself in the, okay. So right now the border of Israel, say, is right here. In the millennial reign, it's way up in the middle of Syria. So it's way up here, okay? When this is done, the new border of Israel will be here in southern Lebanon. So if it's not in the millennial reign and it's not here, and to my knowledge, they've never been that far north, this happens again when the day of the Lord is near, but not here yet, which is our time. So this has to happen in the near future. Even unto Zarephath. And the captivity of Jerusalem, which is in Zarephath, shall possess the cities of the south. So this is an ancient Hebrew word for Spain. So we're talking about the captivity of Jerusalem again from the Canaanites, or not from the Canaanites, from the Romans, because this didn't happen with Nebuchadnezzar. They all went to Babylon. At this point, when the Romans expulsed them, some of the captivities of Jerusalem, along with a lot of the extra books, went to Spain. So Spain and Germany and England actually were major centers of Jewish learning for centuries. And then in the 1200s, England expelled the Jews. And then in 1492, same year that Columbus set sail, the Jews were expulsed. And at that point, those refugees from Seraphon basically had 3 options. You could convert to Roman Catholicism, you can leave the country, or you could die. Those are your options. And so a lot of them officially converted to Roman Catholicism, and the Jews referred to them as pigs, and so it's kind of interesting. But they did that just to stay there. But the majority of them left and went to other countries. And the Israelis know who they are, and some of them are beginning to think about going back to Israel. But it's always been dangerous and a hard road. If Gaza is gone and Hamas is gone and Hezbollah is gone and Iran is neutralized, it might be a much safer place. Remember also, somewhere along the line of all this, we have Jeremiah chapter 49, which talks about the coast of Elam being set on fire. Elam and Persia combined to form Iran. So where the Bashar nuclear things are along the coast, something happens there, it becomes a fire, and it causes not just a fire, but a problem to occur so that everyone has to flee the area. That sounds like radioactive stuff. So there's no nation where refugees of Iran don't come. After that's cleaned up, they go back home and they become a seat for learning for the Lord. That may or may not be the millennial reign, but at that point, Iran is a pretty decent place again. So again, with all that happening at that point, all the major people taken care of, Iran, terrorist type groups in those countries, in Iran, in Lebanon, in Gaza, and other places. And we have the Psalm 83 war that goes along with that too. And some of these may be separate prophecies for the exact same thing, and others may be different. We'll have to wait and see. But so this is what happens then. They come back and they colonize the Negev. Now, I remember way back when Ariel Sharon was, I think it was Ariel Sharon, yeah, when he was still premier, he made the comment about colonizing the Negev, that it was something they would like to do. And about that time, it's wilderness or desert area, so there's no water, you can't do it. You just flat can't do it. But the Israelis invented a system that allows you to pull moisture out of the air. And that's okay because the seas evaporate. So you're just kind of moving water around, but instead of that from the atmosphere, using the air to move the water around. And it became a really good thing. I mean, you can have, and they were very cheap to make. I don't know how they work, but I just remember that happening. And then Ariel Sharon made the comment, now we can actually begin to colonize the Negev. And if everything was perfect and no wars, no major problems, no viruses or anything like that, then it should be able to be finished by 2025. Now, of course, that didn't happen. There were some wars. There were all sorts of things that happened. I don't know that they've went at all in that direction, but they will eventually. And a lot of the Sephardic Jews, for lack of a better term, certain groups will come and migrate there. So this is what's really interesting. Now, this could be all sorts of time, but let me share you this one thing we mentioned, and someone asked last Thursday what scriptures are like that. The thing is, what connects this is the Gaza Strip at one point voted in their government, and the government took the name Hamas. Now, that means one thing in Arabic, but in Hebrew, Hamas means violence. Now, there's a lot of Old Testament passages that talk about violence being done, violent people, and it just means violence. It just happens to be the word Hamas. But there are a handful of scriptures, we're going to look at two of them. There are a handful of scriptures that seem to indicate there is a group called violence, or a group called Hamas. They exist in the end times. They're anti-Semitic, they're anti-Israel. They want to attack places, even the holy places like the Temple Mount. They seem to be headquartered in Gaza, and they are eventually destroyed by the Lord. So it's an interesting set of prophecies. So let me look at that. Just let me see here. Well, let me just bring this over here. This will be easier than looking it up on eSword. This is an article I'm writing for Prophecy Watchers. Can I do this? Okay. It's on the 8.5 by 11, so it's smaller. I apologize for that. But here is one of those in Amos chapter 2, or Amos chapter 6, rather. And it says, it's talking about lots of things. Cross to Calneh and see, and from there go to Hamath. Hamath is in Syria. Go down to Gath of the Philistines. That's Gaza Strip area. Are these kingdoms any better? Are they better than these kingdoms, rather? Is their border better than yours? You will put evil far away and cause the seat of violence to come near. So at a certain point, there is a seat of violence, or the seat of Hamas is going to come near because it's allowed. It's an evil day, and it's at the border of Gath of the Philistines. So there is an end time group that wants to attack Israel named Violence, that apparently is a governmental structure in Gaza Strip in the last days, if we're reading this right. This other one, I'll just read this other one. This is Ezekiel 7, 1 through 11, and mainly the first and the last parts of this. We'll just read this. It says, the morning is come to thee, O thou that dwellest in the land, the time is come. Notice this. The day of trouble is near, and not the sounding again on the mountains. Now, again, if the time of trouble is the time of Jacob's trouble, which is the 7-year tribulation, this is not in the tribulation. This is before it begins. This is the same language that we see in Obadiah, excuse me. And it goes on about God pouring out his fierce anger. But look at this last part here. Behold the day, behold it is come. The morning is gone forth, the rod has blossomed, and pride has budded. Violence, or Hamas, again, it could just be violence in general, but it sounds like a group rising up to do something specific. So Hamas is risen up to be a rod of wickedness. And here's the judgment that God gives. None of them shall remain, nor their multitude, nor any of theirs. Neither will there be any wailing for them. So again, politically, there would be an outcry, normally, Muslim to Muslim. But if they're connected with Iran and everyone is scared of Iran, if that's really the case, at this particular point, there's not going to be an outcry because it's just a little too dangerous. That we can do that later. So it's really interesting, some of the things going on here. And I'll go ahead and close that. But so I wanted to look at this. So in other words, there is a time when the day of the Lord, the 7-year tribulation, is about to begin. And that doesn't mean this year. It could be 5 or 10 or even 20 years from now. But we're in that area of the end of the age. But it's before the tribulation period that Israel comes back. The dwelling peoples flee to Jordan, to Samaria and the Philistines, and create the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And then eventually Benjamin comes and settles in Gilead. Hopefully that's peaceful. The captivity of the host of the children of Israel possessed the entire land of the Canaanites, which is the Gaza Strip up north. But this time it goes all the way to Sarafand, Lebanon. So they take ancient Tyre. Again, the same reason probably applies. If Gaza is neutralized, and I mean that in a good way, it no longer fires rockets, it's peaceful, Hezbollah is going to have a problem. And Lebanon has consistently shown that they can't control Hezbollah. Well, then Israel will. They will take and hold southern Lebanon. And it becomes a center point for Jews that are there. One of the other prophecies actually talks about there's so many Jews there that it can't hardly contain it. So, and then the Sephardic Jews will come back and colonize the Negev. So all this stuff is in the near future. So again, something that could be going on. So the thing is, like I said before, if this fizzles out, or if it works, but then a few years later, somebody in the Israeli government decides to just give it away again, then the whole process starts all over again. But to know that there is a group called Hamas centered, the seat of that entire movement is in Gaza. They are an anti-Semitic power that the Lord deals with. I suppose they could stay around too, but this is pretty specific. We're getting close to the end of the age, even if it's 40, 50 years away. If this is happening now, the political situation is correct now. Netanyahu, it's what caught my attention to do this, actually said we're going to follow the old ways. Every place that we have to go to stop missiles is annexed and becomes Israeli property. Now, if he sticks to his guns on that, that will begin to fulfill this prophecy. So I just wanted to mention this to you in a few of those scriptures. Again, this has all been from the Bible, not extra biblical, but Hamas, Gaza, all those things. We'll go ahead and stop there for this, but thank you all for attending, and hope to see you again soon. God bless you all. Have a good night.